Welcome to Ustick Road Church of the Nazarene in Caldwell, Idaho. And now your speaker, special guest Brianna Dyer.
We're going to go to Luke 15. Starting at verse 11. So this is the parable of the prodigal son. Jesus continued, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, 'Father, give me my share of the estate.' So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his field to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, 'How many of my father's hired men have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired men.' So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, 'Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate, for this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' So they began to celebrate. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. 'Your brother has come,' he replied, 'and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound.' The older brother became angry and refused to go. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, 'Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you killed the fattened calf for him.' 'My son,' the father said, 'you're always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad, because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.'" So I think throughout our lives, there's 3 people in this story, and I feel like we can kind of associate ourselves with different people in the story at different times. We can either be the younger prodigal brother, we can be the older brother who's mad, or we can be the father. And I think at all times we're probably a little bit of all of them. But the last time I read this was during Sunday school, and I really realized that right now my desire is to become more like the father. I think we're in a spot as a society and as a church where there are a lot of prodigals. And my question became, who are we supposed to be as others become prodigals? And I think it's really important before we start to understand that you can be a prodigal and be in the church. You can come to church every single Sunday and be a prodigal. That older son had a prodigal's heart. He didn't want to be there. He said, "I followed your orders, but you didn't even let me party with my friends with a goat." When we read this as a Sunday school, something that Travis brought up that I thought was really powerful was he said, the older son isn't mad because the younger brother's back. He's mad because he didn't get to live the life that the younger brother lived. He tells the father, "You didn't give me a goat so I could go celebrate. I didn't get to go party with my friends." That's not the heart of a servant. That's the heart of a prodigal. That older son, just because he followed the rules, was not in relationship with the father in a different way than the prodigal. And I think sometimes we can get ourselves caught up in, I'm going to be at church every Sunday. I'm going to all these different things. I'm not a prodigal. All these other people out here are prodigals. But our hearts can be just as prodigal. When I was young, I was a perfect kid. So, hypothetically, if I had ever disobeyed. One time, my dad told me, he said, I wouldn't listen to him for something. I know, it was really unique, that situation. But he said, you're either going to love me or fear me, but you will obey me. It wasn't an option of obedience. It was an option of love or fear. And I think we do the same thing with God. I'll obey you because I'm afraid of the consequence if I don't. But that's not a relationship. That's a dictatorship, and God hasn't called us to that. God has called us to relationship, to love him so much that we follow him. And I just want to make that very clear because I think I'm still struggling with sometimes being the prodigal inside the church. You can teach Sunday school, you can do all those things, be here every single Sunday, and still be obeying out of fear and not out of love. So, the father gets this prodigal son, the one who physically leaves the building. And I started to read this and kind of question, what does the father do? How does the father change? How does the father react to this situation? So I obviously came up with 3 things because my dad taught me, and we do 3 things. So the first thing is the father was honorable. We were told once that the Chinese government says when U.S. citizens go to work in China, they say, we assume you're all Christians. We assume you're coming here to be a missionary, but you guys keep your contracts, you work hard, and you do things that no one else is willing to do, so we let you in. So, what an honorable thing. We don't like your stance. We say it's against the law for you to be speaking of Christ, but we assume that that's what you're here to do, but you're so honorable, we'll deal with it. The father was honorable. First of all, he was honorable to others. He treated his servants with respect. When that son came to his senses, the first thing he thought was, this is not how my dad treats people who work for him. My dad treats people better than this. And, Danielle and I, obviously, we're grown women, and so anytime we read a story, we think back to VeggieTales. So, when we read this story in VeggieTales, the little pig farmer goes, feed my pigs, pig boy. And I thought, think of the comparison between this pig farmer, which pigs are nasty. If you're wondering if they're nasty, I got a bunch out there. You can go hang out with them for a little bit. You gonna know they nasty. They stink. They're just rough. And that pig farmer didn't care. He didn't care that his worker was starving. He didn't care. And he didn't even give him, slop. They said he wanted the pods, wanted the corn from the pig's food. Not that he got it. But that father was honorable to other people. He treated others with respect and compassion. He cared. One of the things I talked about when we talked about it in Sunday school was I said, I wonder as the son walked home, if he could tell when he was on non-Jewish soil versus when he was on Jewish soil. Jewish culture was that you plowed in a circle, so your corners stayed ripe. It's where we read about Ruth going out and picking food for Ruth and Naomi. And I said, I wonder, if you could walk and say, wow, this is everything from this crop has been taken. There's nothing. And I wonder if there was a stark difference when he moved into the Jewish community to say, oh, I can eat. I can grab this along the road. I can survive to make this trip. Because the culture was honorable. So as much as that father was honorable, the place he was said we needed to treat people with honor. So as a church, we should be different. People should walk in this building and feel something different. Because we should be honorable to those around us. The other thing, though, was that the father was honorable in his convictions. He never begged the younger son to come back. And he held both of his sons accountable. When that older brother threw a fit, he said, no, you're not going to act like this. He held him accountable. But he also held the younger brother accountable. He told the other brother, everything I have is yours. That younger brother wasn't coming back to more stuff. I'm sure he worked those fields. That father was honorable in his convictions and in his standards. I think sometimes we can get ourselves confused and start thinking, well, in order to reach people, in order to bring back people that we've lost, in order to appeal to others, we have to, compromise ourselves and compromise our convictions. But when I can hold myself to my convictions, it's an honorable stance. The father was also consistent. Something I've learned this year is that inconsistency makes you unsafe. I've watched as moments where I was inconsistent, my kids treated me differently. I've watched other people in my life be inconsistent, and they're not a safe person. If we want to be a place where prodigals feel safe enough to come back to us, we have to be consistent. The father was consistent, first of all, in his behavior. He kept working the field. See, the thing is, I would have imagined if I was the father, I'd have been like, so your younger brother took his stuff. So this is all your land. Have fun. I'm going to go sit on the porch. Make sure I get fed, please, till I die. Thanks. Bye. I would have been that kind of father. It would have been early retirement, baby. But he didn't. The older son says, I followed your orders. I worked your field. The father didn't change. He said, all right, younger son, here's your stuff. But I'm not done. I have to stay on task. I still have a place to work, and I still have things to do. It's really easy, I think, when we have prodigals in our lives, especially prodigals that we've spent years and years putting our time and effort and money and heart into. It's really easy to just step back from everything else. But the father stayed on task. He had a goal. And we have huge goals, right? We have this calling to plow the fields, to work God's fields. And we don't get to walk away from that because a prodigal left. This year was rough for me at my job. And I walked into my final evaluation in March, knowing I wasn't going to be rehired. My kids made 2 years of growth across the board, and I still knew that it didn't matter. Things were spoken untrue. Untrue things were spoken about me. Things were hidden that were brought to light at that last meeting. But I knew walking into that what was going to happen. So I knew 2 months before school was over that I wasn't going back. And I still spent my preps working in other classrooms. And there was one point where one of mom's kiddos was adorable, but had more energy than anybody else in the whole world. And so I pulled him out of the room and said, dude, we're just going to work out in the hall. I didn't have to do that. It was my prep. Prep means I could have just chilled in my room for 50 minutes. But I didn't. And mom's coworker said, I just don't understand. And I said, Like, what? I mean, he's working on the alphabet. I don't know. I hope you understand this. You're a teacher. And she said, you should be disengaged. We did you dirty. You should be disengaged at this point. Why are you out here working with him? And I thought, true, I could take a nap. I mean, there's a lot of things. I worked with 6th graders. I was tired. But my conviction and my calling didn't stop because someone had done me dirty. My calling was still the same, was still to work and invest in these kids. And it leaves me with no regrets. We got a call on Monday that a 3rd grader at our school passed away from bleeding in the brain. It was a fluke. And it sucked. And I went to the funeral with no regrets. I wasn't afraid that I had done something wrong or felt like I could have done more. I went knowing that I had spent the most I could and put the most I could in him, that I had fulfilled my calling to Christ in that little boy's life. If we're not consistent in our behavior, when we start pulling back, we are the ones who get the consequence, not the prodigal. But we also have to be consistent in our expectations. Our expectations of ourselves. I still expect professionalism. I still expected those things out of me. But also consistent in our expectations of others. That father didn't change his expectations of the older son, and he didn't change his expectations of that younger son. I wish we could have learned about what what happened to the son after the party, because I imagine it was a rough talk. Well, you don't got nothing, dude, so how are you going to make ends meet, dude? I ain't got no pigs for you to feed. You have no experience anywhere. Your resume is terrible. The father had expectations for both of those sons, and they didn't change. He didn't beg his older son to handle it. He said, handle it. Everything I have is yours. Deal with it. One of the things we learned this year was something called love and logic. And so I would be a huge part of it is that you give your kids choices. So, I had one little boy, energy. I think he climbed the walls some days. I don't know. And I would say to him, all right, dude, your choice. Do you want to sit by me in the front of the room? Do you want to sit by me, or do you want to go sit in your desk? And I'd say it every day. Your choice. Sit by me or go sit at your desk. And I'd say it, 50 times a day. You want to sit with me or sit at your desk? Want to sit with me, sit at your desk. And finally he just said, oh, come on, miss, I'm going to sit at my desk. And I was like, cut the attitude. But also, okay, your choice. Do you want to sit with me or sit at your desk? My expectation of him didn't change. His options didn't change just because he said, oh, you know what I'm going to do. I don't know what you're going to do. Maybe today you feel like sitting by me. I'm pretty cool. That father could have said, you know what? Never mind. All bets off. This is my land now. We're going to split it in half. He could have. It was his choice, the father's choice. But he said, no, you already took your land. His expectations didn't change. And that's what keeps him honorable, and it's what keeps him safe. And it's why the prodigal could come back to him, because he was honorable and he was safe. When we become inconsistent, when we become dishonorable, we become unsafe people. And no prodigal wants to come back to an unsafe person. It's a vulnerable spot. But lastly, the father was hopeful. When we give up on our hope, we are the ones who change. We start to become inconsistent. We start to become dishonorable. We start changing because we don't have hope. What is there if there's not hope? And that father could have lost hope. There was no email or texting or Snapchat. He really didn't know what was going on with that son. He could have lost hope, but he didn't. And we are called to the same expectation, to keep our hope, because our hope is grounded in Jesus Christ. And regardless of what prodigal is in your world, or regardless of what frustration lies there, Christ didn't change. Your situation did, but he didn't. Jeremiah 29:11 is a verse I always remember because it says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." And I always said, "a hope," and I get in trouble in children's quizzing. It's not a hope. Brianna, say it again. Plans to give you a hope and a future. No, plans to give you hope and a future. Not a hope, not one of your hopes. Hope. It is all of your hope. It is not a hope. And it took me a long time to get that verse right, and then I did, and I have trophies for it, so boom, children's quizzing rocks. But it became really significant to me to understand the difference, that God never promised a hope or a hopeful situation or a hopeful moment. He promised hope. Hope in ugly situations, hope in hopeless moments, hope. Just hope. It was interesting because I was reading a bunch about prodigals, and then, and one of the most impactful things I read was about how Jesus' brothers didn't all believe in him when he was on this earth. And I was like, I don't know if this is true. Is this true? I don't know. And then Dad was talking about it in Sunday school. I was like, okay, maybe it's true. I mean, he's ordained. He knows a little bit about the Bible, I've heard. I don't know. Maybe it's true. But how crazy. That's a hopeless situation. You're the Messiah, and your brothers are like, come on, dude. Like, that's intense. Like, they calling their mama a liar. They calling their daddy a liar when they say that. Their world was surrounded with the Messiah, and even they said, nah. But they came later to their understanding of Christ. And we read Jude this morning, and I thought one of the most significant things was that Jude introduces himself as a servant of Jesus Christ and a brother to James. And I was like, if I was the brother of Jesus, you wouldn't forget that I was the brother of Jesus. I'd be like, one time my brother got lost. Oh, my brother Jesus Christ. Do you remember him? No? Okay. But to Jude, it was more important to be a servant of Jesus Christ. And then to say, hey, and my brother is James, that other guy that believes in Jesus now. But we're servants of Jesus. But Jesus didn't ever see that. It didn't happen while he was here. And this week I went and I preached at like I don't know what you would call it, a people over 40 thing. Service. I don't know what you call that. I don't want to call it elderly. I don't know what to call it. Over 40 plus service. And I told them, and I said, you might not see that prodigal come back. You might never see it. And there are prodigals in my life that I am praying hard for right now. Prodigals that go to church places. Prodigals that are outside of the church completely. There are prodigals in my life I'm praying for, and I might not even ever see them come back. And that is why it is so important for us to remember God doesn't give us a hope. He doesn't give me a hope in that situation. He gives me hope. Period. End of discussion. Jesus Christ is my hope. And as I continue to be hopeful, filled with Jesus Christ in hope, I can be honorable, and I can be consistent, and I can be safe. And that is the only way for prodigals to be ready to come back. So I think to me that was really huge. Because a lot of times I got enough of my dad in me to want to just beat people over the head. Like, Mom will pray for you. She'll write verses, with your name in it. She'll write you cards. And I just get mad. I get mad when I see someone fall from grace. I get angry. And I think a huge part of that is like my top 5 strengths. One of those is developer. So I see your potential. And I see how far it is from outside of the church walls. But we don't see the father get angry. That son says, hey, can you give me my property? And the father doesn't say, are you kidding me? I'm not even dead. No. He says, yeah, here it is. And whatever consequences come with that, those are the sons to bear. But if he had riled himself up, I don't think it would have made the son stay. The son was leaving. But he let him leave in a way that treated him with honor and respect and consistency. So that when the prodigal was ready to come home, I don't think he wasn't scared. I think he was scared. But he was able to come back because he understood who that person was that he was coming home to. I said, you can always tell the parents who are consistent and the parents who are inconsistent at school. Because when you hand out report cards and they have a bad score on them, parents who are consistent, the kid goes, ooh, my mama not gonna like that grade. Mm-mm. But that's it. And they take their note home and they bring it back, and that's it. And parents who are inconsistent, those kids are afraid. Because they don't know what's coming when they hand that report card in. They don't know if it's going to be fine. They don't know if that mom or dad is going to be real angry. They don't know. Who knows? Those parents are unsafe because they're inconsistent. We have to be consistent, but we also have to be consistent in our expectations. Those consistent parents didn't stop having expectations for their kids to perform well in school. They had the same expectations. And one of my kids goes, Miss, could you send a different report card? And I go, And he goes, look, she took my phone and my Xbox, and I got nothing to do at home. And I said, well, you're low in writing, so I think you could write. And he said, just send another one home. No! You know, that mom still had expectations of her son. The expectation was, you gonna write better than that. And he did by the end of the year. He wrote way better. I think it was because he didn't have his phone or Xbox. But there are still consequences. There are still expectations. And I just want that to be very clear. It doesn't change who you are. You don't stop expecting excellence out of people. You don't stop expecting excellence out of people inside and outside of the church. But you do it in a way that is honorable. And you do it in a way that is loving. And you do it in a way that is consistent and shows Jesus Christ to those around us. Because if we can't, then who are we? You know, you go back to think about that son. He could see the difference between crops that the Jews plowed and crops they didn't. How does your life look different if you are disrespectful, if you are not honorable, if you're not consistent, if you hold low expectations or let them change? How are you any different than this world? But it starts with us. So I think sometimes it's easy to be the prodigal and say, I know a lot of prodigals. Well, yeah, because you're friends with them, because you are prodigal. So start with having high expectations of yourself. Expect excellence and expect a Christ-filled world and life. And then worry about the prodigals in your life.
Thanks for joining us today. You can find Eustick Road Church of the Nazarene on the web at eusticknaz.org and on many social media sites at eusticknaz. Thanks, and God bless.